next stage of the workshop, we have a very special guest for a plenary speech. And we are very proud to have Paul Nation, a professor at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand.
Paul Nation is a leading language educator teaching methodology and vocabulary acquisition, mainly for English as a foreign language. He has taught in Indonesia, Thailand, the United States, Finland, and Japan. He is going to give us ideas about vocabulary teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Nation with a big applause.
Thank you very much. You can see how beautiful New Zealand is. While listening to the Korean national song, it brought back very familiar memories. I think I have memorized the Korean national song because I have been watching the Olympic Games. And every time I turn on the television, there is the Korean flag and another Korean winning a gold medal. Don't worry, New Zealand is trying to catch up. We're really trying hard. Today I want to talk about how you go about teaching a language. Probably better to say how you go about organizing the learning of a language, and also to talk about what vocabulary learners should be learning. I want to deal with only a few points because I think that these are very important things. And then at the end I will try and tell you what I think you should take away from what I say today. For me, the most important principle for language teaching is that a teacher should provide a good balance of opportunities for learning. That is, the learners should have the opportunity to learn in 4 different ways. And if you want to know if your language course and your vocabulary course is a well-designed course or not, then you need to look at it and say, is my course giving an opportunity to learn in each of the 4 ways which are important for learning? The first way, which is important for learning, is learning from input, learning from listening and learning from reading. And about 1/4 of the time in a language course needs to be spent on learning through listening and reading. This doesn't mean doing listening exercises with multiple choice questions or working through a reading passage with a teacher, translating the passage and so on. What it means is the learners should spend about 1/4 of their time reading books which are at the right level for them and which are interesting for them and which they are reading because they want to understand what the book is saying. Now this is very important because I think if you take the teaching of English as a foreign language, if you want to make one change in your course, only one change, the best change you could make would be to set up an extensive reading program as part of your course and spend just under 1/4 of the course time on the extensive reading program. And if you did nothing else, that would bring about a very big improvement in English proficiency. Now, people have been saying this for many years, and there is lots and lots of research about it. I can find you 50 studies, research studies, on how people learn and how much they learn from doing extensive reading. So the research is very clear about this. I have just completed a piece of research myself looking at whether it is possible for somebody to learn the first 10,000 words of English simply through reading. Is it possible to read enough to meet those words often enough to learn them? And it is possible. There has been an argument about it, but I have looked and done some research, and it is easily possible for learners to do enough reading to be able to get a good control of the first 10,000 words of English. It's a lot of reading. It means in the early stages doing about 40 or 50 minutes of reading a week, and when learners become very proficient, when they know about 6,000 or 7,000 words, then they need to be reading over 1 million words a year. 1 million words a year sounds a lot, but it isn't a lot. It's 10 novels. That's all it is, 10 novels. And so it is possible to learn through extensive reading, and this is the single most important change and improvement that a teacher of English as a foreign language could make in their course. So that's my first strong recommendation to you. If your learners are not doing extensive reading, if you don't know what extensive reading is, then go on the web, type extensive reading, and you will find lots of information and lots of resources. So the first important way in which there should be an opportunity for learning is learning through input. And extensive reading is one of the kinds of input. The other kinds of input include listening to stories, the teacher managing the class in English, listening using digital tape recorders or iPods and iPads, where you can control the speed of the listening so that you can slow it down or speed it up and it still sounds okay. So these are the ways then you can get lots of learning through listening. The second major way that you should have for learning in a course is learning through output. That is, learners need to have the opportunity to speak and to write. And speaking and writing should make up about 1/4 of the course time, learning through output. People learn through output because it makes them look at input in a different way. When you know that you're going to have to write or going to have to speak, then you you pay attention to input in a different way. But output also provides opportunities for learning. And when we use things in new ways, through speaking and through writing, these then stay in our memory very strongly. So those two parts of a course, the strand of input and the strand of output, make up about, or should make up, about 50% of the ideal English course. The activities for learning through output are learning through doing problem-solving discussions, doing my favorite activity, which is linked skills activity. Now, have we got a handout? Anybody got a handout for this talk or not? Yeah? Good. Okay. Everybody got one? Yeah, good. Okay, good. Okay. And so if you look in table 1 at the output strand, you will see linked skills activities. And if I have to rank the activities in the output strand, I would put linked skills as a top activity. It's one of my favorite teaching activities, and we're going to look at it in a little bit more detail. The third major way in which people learn vocabulary and other aspects of language is through learning deliberately, learning through language-focused learning. And about 1/4 of the course time should be spent deliberately studying the language, deliberately learning pronunciation, deliberately learning vocabulary, deliberately learning grammar. Grammar translation is something I like. I like grammar translation very much. It's a very efficient and effective way of getting language-focused learning. But it should only make up one part of 1/4 of the course. And not the whole quarter of the course, just one part of 1/4 of the course. And if it does that, then grammar translation is a very useful activity. Other activities in the language-focused learning strand are bilingual word cards, learning words on little cards, where you have the English on one side and the translation in Korean on the other. This is a very, very efficient way of learning. And it actually results in learning which is useful for people who do that kind of learning. There have been arguments against this kind of learning, saying that deliberate learning doesn't result in the kind of knowledge we need for normal language use. Those arguments are wrong. There is research now which shows that when you deliberately learn vocabulary, it enters not only your conscious knowledge, but it also enters your subconscious knowledge. And it's the subconscious knowledge that we draw on when we use language normally. And so the criticisms which have been made of deliberate learning for vocabulary are wrong, because there is now research which shows that this kind of deliberate learning results in what's called implicit knowledge as well as explicit knowledge. The fourth kind of learning that learners need to do is to learn to become fluent in what they already know. So we have 4 strands in a course. We have the strand of learning through input, through listening and reading, the strand of learning through output, through speaking and writing, learning deliberately through studying grammar, studying vocabulary, having the teacher explain the meaning of a text to you. And then the 4th strand is the fluency strand, the strand of becoming really quick and fast at using what you already know. And for each skill of listening, speaking, reading and writing, we need special fluency practice. Now, fluency activities are very, very effective. They are so effective that it almost seems untrue. If you do a speed reading course, a speed reading course involves usually reading about 20 passages under timed conditions. And when you add up the time that you spend on it, a learner will spend less than 2 hours in total doing the whole course. And yet for that 2 hours work, they can increase their reading speed by at least 50%. And in many cases, they double their reading speed. So by having a special small course which develops reading fluency, you can get very big improvement for a small amount of time. But we also need to develop fluency in speaking. And on the handout, you've got 432. This is my favorite speaking fluency activity. A very nice little activity where learners work in pairs and one learner talks to the other for 4 minutes on a topic, and then they change partners to a new partner, and then the person gives the same talk again for 3 minutes, and then changes to a new partner and gives the same talk again for 2 minutes. They mustn't change what they say. They give exactly the same talk 3 times, one after the other, each time to a new listener. And half of the class are speakers and the other half are listeners. And this is a very good activity for becoming fluent in speaking and using what you already know to be able to speak fluently. There's now some research going on speed writing. That is, where learners write for 10 minutes or 7 minutes, depending how much time you want to spend, 2 or 3 times a week, trying to write as much as they can in that short time. And when they finish the writing, they count the number of words put them on a graph, and then try to do better next time. There's listening activities for increasing listening speed, and on the end of the handout you'll see a link to a website which will give you lots of quick listen activities. So the 4 strands of a course then involve learning through input, learning through output, language-focused learning, and fluency development. Now, how do you fit all of this into 3 or 4 classes a week? So I've listed about 15 or 16 activities here, but how can you do all this if you only see your learners for 3 or 4 hours a week? It's still possible to do that. What you then have to do is to take the theme of this conference seriously. And one of the parts of the theme of the conference is independent learning. And so the teacher then needs to make sure that some of the activities which are developing the learner's English proficiency are done by the learner outside of class time. Now, a very good example of this would be extensive reading. But it would be a very foolish teacher who says to the learners, here are the books, okay, do extensive reading for homework. My guarantee is about 70% won't do it. So whenever you introduce an activity like that, you have to introduce it in the classroom first. And that means you have to spend part of the English classes for at least 2 or 3 months getting the learners doing extensive reading so that they know what to do, they know how to do it, they know how to keep a record of it, and most importantly, they learn that it is something that is easy to do and that might be enjoyable. So with something like extensive reading, it's really important that there is an opportunity to be forced to do it in the classroom so that it becomes something that learners can easily do outside the classroom. Okay, now have a look at Table 1, because in Table 1 you have the activities. There's a question under the table which says, which activities occur twice in the table? Why can an activity occur in 2 different strands? So what I want you to do now is to talk to your neighbour, what's the answer to that question? The reason why I want you to talk to your neighbour is that if you get the answer wrong, you can blame your neighbour. You don't have to blame yourself. Okay, so you've got a couple of minutes then to see which activities are in 2 or more different places in the table. How can they be in 2 different places? Go. I'm going to walk around and make sure that you're talking to your neighbour. Giving a talk after lunch is not a good idea. Good. Okay. Anybody find one which occurs more than once in the table? Don't put up your hand if you want to give the answer. This is the best teaching technique I ever learned in my life. You don't say to the class, put up your hand if you want to give the answer. Nobody puts up their hand. So you say, if you want to give the answer, don't put up your hand. Okay, so don't put up your hand if you want to give the answer. Excellent! Everybody wants to give the answer. Okay. Yep. You? Yeah. Which one occurs twice in the table? Which one can you see?
Listening to stories in the first and fourth table.
Yeah, listening to stories occurs in the input strand and the fluency strand. Great. Thank you for staying awake. Good. Is there another one which occurs more than once in the table? Don't put up your hand if you want to give the answer. Thank you very much. Got another one? Don't look behind you, it's you.
Speaking.
Eh?
Speaking.
Speaking. You just failed. Extensive reading occurs twice. Extensive reading occurs in the input strand and also in the fluency strand. Yeah.
Speaking occurs in the meaning focused output
Yeah.
and in fluency development.
Oh, you're looking at column 2. Okay, I'll let you off. Okay, you pass. Okay, you pass. Okay. But there are different activities in those two places. So which activities occur twice in the table? And the heading for column 3 is activities. Okay. Yeah, the reason why the same activity can occur in two places is because it is done differently. And the way it is done differently is if you do it in the fluency part, it must be very easy. It must be something that the learners have done before. It must be something that they know a lot about, but it is very, very easy. So when you have extensive reading for fluency development, the learners read really easy books. If they are normally reading books at level 4, then for fluency, they should be reading books at level 1 or level 2. But they read them very fast. Or what they can do is they read the same book again. So if they read a book at level 4 for learning through input, then later they can read the same book again for fluency development, but try to go faster. The number one requirement for fluency is that it is easy. And the number 2 requirement is that you try to go faster. So fluency activities must be easy, and there needs to be some push to go faster than normal. Another one that occurs in more than one place? I'm checking your reading skill here, seeing if you can read and recognize that these are similar. Link skills. Yeah, link skills occurs in 2 or 3 places, doesn't it, in that table. And that's because the link skills activity involves the same kind of material, but using a different skill. So let's have a look at link skills. So we turn over the page, and if you look over the page, you see 5 linked skills activities. Okay? Now, linked skills activities are very, very common activities in first language classrooms in New Zealand. Teachers who are primary school teachers in first language classrooms use linked skills activities a lot. And in secondary school classrooms, they're quite common as an activity. And the activity is very simple. It simply means you focus on the same material, but you do it 3 times using a different language skill each time. Now you have the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, writing. So you could listen to something, then you could speak about what you listened to, and then you could write about what you listened to. And then you'd be focusing on the same material 3 times using a different skill each time. So linked skills activities are quite easy to make. So let's look at the table and see some examples. To understand the table, you have to read across the table. So the first activity, read the questions without seeing the text and try to guess the answers. So what the teacher does, the teacher gets a reading passage but doesn't give it to the learners. Teacher keeps the reading passage and then puts some questions on the board for the learners to answer. How can they answer the questions without reading the passage? Well, step number one is try to guess the answers to the questions before they get the reading passage. So that's number one. Then the second activity, listen to the text and check and correct your answers. So first of all, they see the questions, then they think, oh, probably the answer is this, probably it's this. I can't guess this one. And then the second part of the linked skills activity is they hear the passage and then they see if their answers were correct and they try to make them correct. And then the third activity is that they talk to their neighbour about their guess. Was their guess correct? Was their guess wrong? What did they have to change? And so on. And they compare their answers with their neighbour's answer. This is so the teacher doesn't have to do any marking. Any activity which makes work for the teacher to do can't be a very good activity. Activity should try to keep the teacher doing as little work as possible. Teachers don't get high salaries, they shouldn't work too hard. Okay. The second linked skill activity. So in the first one we saw read, listen, speak. Okay. Now in this next activity we've got read, listen and write, and then write. So the learners read the text, then they listen to the questions and they write answers to the questions, and then they write guidelines for storing food safely. I just used the topic of food storage for the text. And so as a result of reading the passage and of listening to the questions and talking about them, then they then have to write their own guidelines using the information from the passage. Linked skills activities are really good for vocabulary learning. And the reason they're good for vocabulary learning is because, first of all, they involve repetition. You do the same material 3 times. So that means the vocabulary should come back the first time, the second time, the third time, so that there will be repetition. The second thing which helps vocabulary learning is that when they do the second part and the third part of the activity, they can bring back to their memory what they just met about that piece of vocabulary. And that bringing back to the memory is called retrieval. And retrieval is one of the strongest conditions for vocabulary learning. That is, you've seen something and then you try and bring back to your memory what you've seen. Each time you bring it back successfully, you strengthen the connection between the form and the meaning of the word. So retrieval is a very important learning condition. The third condition, which is good in the linked skills activity for vocabulary, is what's called creative use. And creative use means you meet the same word, but it is not exactly the same as you met before. And if there is a small difference between this meeting and the previous meeting, that makes memory much stronger. In the research, this is called generative use, but I think creative use is a clearer way of explaining it. And so these 3 conditions then of repetition, retrieval, and generative use. It's all right, yeah. I'm still alive. Okay, good. That's the thunder. I'm waiting for the lightning. Maybe the lightning. Oh, this is the lightning. Okay, the message is the lightning, folks. Okay, you're getting a lightning message and the thunder's coming later. Good. Wow. Okay. Can you still hear me? Oh. Bad luck, folks. You can still hear me. Never mind. Okay. And so if you look at the third activity and the fourth and the fifth activity in the table, you can see that it's not very difficult to make linked skills activities. All you need is a reading passage, and then you think, will I get them to read first? Or will I get them to speak about it first, then read, then write? Or will I ask them to write about the topic, and then read about it, and then speak about it? It's very easy. You can make a linked skills activity in 2 or 3 minutes. You don't have to write lots of questions or anything like that. But the whole idea is that you do something which is quite important in learning, and that is that you don't rush ahead, but you waste some time. You waste time looking at the same material again and again and again, but in a slightly different way each time. So linked skills activities set up very, very good learning conditions. And so that's why they're one of my number one activities. Okay, so we've looked then a little bit at how you could improve your language course. The major improvement would be adding an extensive reading program. Yeah, and when I say an extensive reading program should make up almost 1/4 of the course, the reason I say 1/4 is because extensive reading should be half of the input strand and 1/4 of the fluency strand. Because in the fluency strand you need to have listening, speaking, reading, writing, and so that reading can be also part of the fluency strand. So that already makes up 3/8 of the language course. And so that's the first major improvement. The second major improvement that you could make to your course would be to make sure that you have a balance of the 4 kinds of opportunities for learning. I call them the 4 strands. And a strand is something long and thin. I used to demonstrate the meaning of strand by pulling out a piece of my hair and saying, here is a strand of hair. I cannot afford to do that now. Okay. But if any volunteers from the audience would like to, but don't demonstrate it too much, otherwise you end up with my condition. But I've given my life to teaching, and I have the lack of strands to prove it. Okay, so the second major improvement that you could make to a course is to make sure that there is this balance of 4 learning opportunities. If I make a guess about your language courses, my guess would be 80% of your course is language-focused learning. 20% is whatever else from the other strands. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe I'm being unfair. But it's not the balance that you need. And the biggest barrier to getting a balance of activities of these 4 different kinds is in the heart of the teacher. It's not the lack of resources. It's easy to find resources for input and for output and for fluency development. They're all there. It's not hard to find resources. The biggest problem is the heart of the teacher. And the problem is that teachers think, I am a teacher. Teacher contains the word teach. Therefore, I must teach. But teaching is the least important job of the teacher. The number 1 job of the teacher is not to teach. The number 1 job of the teacher is to plan. And the teacher plans, the best way the teacher can plan is by saying, how do I get my learners doing extensive reading? How can I get them doing extensive listening? How can I get them to get some time to do speaking output activities? How can I get them to do some deliberate learning? And when you look at the activities in this table, and if you look at the second question under table 1, the second question says, for each of these activities, Where is the main focus? Individual work, group work, focus on the teacher. If you look at these activities and you look at them carefully, most of the activities are not focused on the teacher. Most of the activities are individual work or group work activities. So the number one job of the teacher is not to teach. It's a mistake to think that teaching is important. I can prove that teaching is not important. I have looked at the research on teaching vocabulary. And when you look at the research on teaching vocabulary, you find that if the teacher gets up and teaches words to the learners, and then immediately after the teaching, you give the learners a test, the learners are lucky to remember 50% of what the teacher taught them. Now, I can prove that because there's lots of research which involves learners being taught words, and they get taught them in different ways, and then they do an experiment to see which way was the best, and so on. The worst one I've seen is in America, where they had an article which was teaching vocabulary to young learners in the primary school. And when I looked at what they were doing and calculated how much time they were spending on teaching and so on, it worked out that they were teaching at the rate of 1 word per hour. 1 word per hour! And the result was 1 word was learnt every 2 hours. Less than half of the words were learnt. So they spent 16 hours in this experiment doing all kinds of activities, teaching the vocabulary and so on. And, they didn't do the calculation of how much time per word they did. If they did, they would give up. But they didn't do that. I did that when I read their study. And then when you look at the results of their study, the learners learned 50%. So even teaching at the rate of 1 word per hour, the learners still only learned half of what they were taught. Now, I can get you to learn 50 words in less than 2 hours. I can pick a language that you've never met before, and I bet that I can get you to learn 50 words in 2 hours. Because if you were my students in my master's course on teaching and learning vocabulary, one of the tasks that you have to do is to learn 50 words from another language using word cards. And you just put them on the cards, and then you have to learn them, and you keep a record of your time. Everybody in the class, but these are master's students, so they should be clever. Well, they should be. And everybody manages to learn the 50 words in somewhere between 1 hour and 20 minutes and 2 hours in total, spread over 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and so on. So this learning rate from teaching of 50%, and you can barely teach a few words per hour, is a very, very inefficient way of going about getting people to learn. And this is why language-focused learning, one of the reasons why language-focused learning should only be 1/4 of the course. And if you look at the activities in Table 1, we have bilingual word cards, strategy training, intensive reading. Well, these are 3 major kinds of activity. Bilingual word cards is individual learning. The teacher has nothing to do with, here's your card, what's on the back, you tell me what's on the back. That'd be a waste of time. The learners have to get on and do that. So it's really important then that teachers don't teach too much, but that they plan the course well. The second major job of the teacher is to train. That is to train the learners in the strategies of using word cards, of guessing, of how to do extensive reading properly. Train the learners to be learners who don't require the teacher sitting next to them all the time. The third most important job of the teacher is to test the learners. And that is to test to see, what do the learners know? How much have they learned? If I ask you, how many words do your students know? Can you honestly give me the answer and say, yes, I have given them the test and I know that their vocabulary size is... Now, if you can't answer that question, you should feel guilty. You feel guilty? Don't put up your hand if you feel guilty. Terrific, everybody feels guilty. The reason I'm happy that you feel guilty is because guilt is the beginning of action. When you ask somebody to do something, they don't usually do it, but they feel guilty. And so the next time you ask them, they still don't do it, but they feel more guilty. And then by the third or fourth time, they are so guilty, maybe they will do it. Okay, so I want you to feel guilty. Because it's really important that the teacher knows how many words do your learners know. It's very easy to find this out. If you go to my website, there's the vocabulary size test. You can get your learners to sit that test. If you are very trusting of your learners, and many teachers are not, you can go to the website my.vocabularysize.com, and there the same test is online. The learners can sit the test online, get the result in a few minutes. No problem. Or you can go to the Lexical Tutor website. The test is available there, and you can sit the test there, and the learners can get the result. So it's very easy to find out, but unless you know how many words your learners know, it's very hard to give them the right reading material and to tell them what kind of vocabulary learning to do next. And so the fourth most important job of the teacher is to teach. And the teacher shouldn't spend too much time teaching. So we have the number one job of planning, making sure that the four strands are evenly balanced. The number two job of training, so that learners become independent learners. The number three job of testing, so that your course is at the right level for the learners. And then the number four job of teaching, but it should be only a small job. Now, the other way in which you plan is by planning what the learners should learn. And so if we look on the handout where it says on the page 2, what vocabulary, then here's some information about the vocabulary that learners need. The high frequency words of English are around about 2,000 word families. Everybody needs those. You can't do anything without those words. They are really important. The graded readers that you buy are usually written within the first 2,000 words of the language. But the same 2,000 words, most of the same 2,000 words, are important for speaking and for listening and for reading and for writing. They're very common, useful words. We then distinguish a second kind of vocabulary. And the second kind of vocabulary is called the mid-frequency vocabulary. And there'll be an article coming out this year in the journal Language Teaching by Norbert Schmidt and his wife Diane about mid-frequency vocabulary. But mid-frequency vocabulary consists of about 7,000 words from the 3,000 up to the 9,000. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 7,000. Because the 9,000 word level is where learners have to go if they want to be able to read English without using a dictionary. If you want to be able to read English independently, then you need 8,000 to 9,000 words. To read a newspaper, you need 8,000 words. To read a novel written for young learners of English, like Alice in Wonderland or something like that, you need about 6,000 words. To listen to a conversation and to understand most of the words, you need about 6,000 words. If you want to watch the movie Toy Story or Shrek or Lion King or something like that, you need a vocabulary of about 6,000 words in order to understand 98% of the words in that movie. You can still enjoy the movie when you don't know all the words, but if you want to be able to follow 98% of the words in the movie, you need a 6,000 word vocabulary. If you want to read an academic textbook, you need about an 8,000 or 9,000 word vocabulary. And so that's why we now distinguish the mid-frequency vocabulary. And the mid-frequency vocabulary goes from the 3,000 to the 9,000. Here's some good news. I hope it's good news. One of the things I've been working on recently is to make some graded readers to help the learning of mid-frequency vocabulary. And the good news is that they are free. If you go to my website, you can download these books free. At the moment, there are only 2 there, but in the next 2 or 3 weeks, there will be 5, and each book is written at 3 different levels. You can get the book at the 4,000 level, the 6,000 level, or the 8,000 level. And it's almost like reading the original, because the changes made are only changing somewhere between 600 and 1,000 different words in the novels or the books. My goal is to have 50 books there, so that people who have a vocabulary size of more than 3,000 words can go and find material at the right level. And my goal is it should always be free. So it's never going to be charged for, folks. You can download those for nothing. And so that's the mid-frequency vocabulary. Now, if you look here, it shows coverage, and coverage means that if you know the high-frequency words, you know 86% of the words in any written text. Okay? Now, that sounds quite good, but 86% means that 14% are not known, and 14% is 1 out of every 7 is an unknown word. And so that means when you're reading, if there are 10 words in a line, then that means in 2 lines there will be 3 unknown words. So if you only know the first 2,000, it's not nearly enough. When you know the first 8,000 or 9,000, then the coverage figure goes up to 95 plus. If we add in the proper nouns at 3 to 4%, we add those in because you don't have to know them beforehand, then you get up to 98%. That's a very important figure, because when you know 98% of the words, you can then read and listen without having to worry about having to look up those words in the dictionary. You can either guess them or you just don't worry about them. So that's the mid-frequency vocabulary. That's the next important step after learners know the high-frequency words. The third group of words is the low-frequency vocabulary, and that's vocabulary from the 10th 1,000 onwards, and they make up only 1 to 2% of the words in a text. But that 1 to 2% means 2 or 3 or 6, up to 6 words on every page of a book would be a low-frequency word. And when you read a book, if you meet 5 or 6 new words on every page, and there's 100 pages or 200 pages in the book, then that's 500 to 1,000 new words that you will meet. And so when we make these mid-frequency readers, we get rid of those low-frequency words. We replace them with high-frequency words so that then there isn't a big vocabulary load from the reading. Okay, so it's really important then, first of all, that you know what your learner's vocabulary size is. How many words do your learners know? Do they know all the high-frequency words or not? How many of the mid-frequency words do they know? If they know the high-frequency words already, and are getting into the 3rd or 4,000, then they could be starting to read mid-frequency readers, which will be at the right level for them. And so it's important to test. And then it's important that the learners keep moving forward in their knowledge of the vocabulary. Their goal needs to be around about 8,000 or 9,000 words. It's a big goal, but it is a goal that's achievable. If you want to be a university student, we've been measuring the vocabulary sizes of foreign students in our university, and they have vocabulary size. The undergraduate students have vocabulary sizes of about 8,000 words, and the PhD students have vocabularies of 9,000 words. And they are generally successful in their study. So that's the kind of vocabulary size that you need to be aiming at. Okay, so I'm going to stop. What do you have to take away from today? What are the things I want you to remember? Okay, first thing to remember is add extensive reading to your program. If you don't know anything about it, go on the web, start searching and reading. There are many free booklets about extensive reading. Oxford offers a booklet. I don't know, does Compass offer a free booklet? Compass offers a free booklet about extensive reading. It explains how you do extensive reading, how you organize it, what kind of books the learner should read, and so on. And you really need to understand what extensive reading is. In China, for example, they don't usually understand extensive reading. They think extensive reading means reading a long book, which is very hard. But that's not extensive reading. Extensive reading means reading things which are at the right level for you, so that only 2% of the words on any page are unfamiliar to you. No more than 2%. And you need to be reading at least one book every 2 weeks. They can be short graded readers or so on, but it needs to be something where if you do extensive reading and you say, well, how many books did your students read during this term? And if the answer is 1, you're not doing extensive reading. If the answer is 8, 10, then you might be doing extensive reading. So extensive reading is really a quantity-based approach to learning, but it has to be at the right level for the learner. So that's the number one thing, folks. Make sure extensive reading is part of your program. Second thing is, have a look at your course and see if you have a balance of learning opportunities. Do you have the strand of input? Do you have the strand of output? Do you have the language-focused learning strand? Do you have the fluency strand? Fluency doesn't happen by magic. You have to practice to become fluent. But it's easy to become fluent. You imagine if you learn English for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, and at the end of that time, you know all of these words and all of these things, but whenever you want to say something, it doesn't come out. Or whenever you listen to something, it's too fast. Or whenever you read something, you read so slowly. You can have a lot of knowledge which is useless if you can't access it fluently. And fluency activities are designed to make sure that what you know becomes what you can use. And so it's a very important strand of a course, and about 1/4 of the time should be spent on fluency development. Fluency development activities are good. The teacher does almost no work in fluency development activities. If the teacher smokes, okay, go out and have a cigarette while the learners do a fluency activity. Or if the teacher drinks, okay, go outside and have a drink. No, bed not. Okay. I'm supposed to be setting a good example. Have a drink of water while the learners do a fluency development activity. So that's the second thing to take away. Make sure there is a balance of activities across your courses. The third thing is make sure that the activities that you are using are good activities. And good activities from a vocabulary learning perspective involve repetition, they involve retrieval, and they involve creative use. And so you should look at your activities and say, can I see that when the learners do this activity, the same vocabulary is coming back again? When it is coming back, are the learners having to bring it back from their memory? Is it coming back in a way which is just a little bit different from how it was meant before? And then the fourth thing to take away from here is the goals of vocabulary learning. So these goals are very big goals. Unfortunately, you can't use English well in all sorts of uncontrolled places for reading, listening, speaking, writing, unless you have a fairly large vocabulary of at least 5,000 or 6,000 words, and preferably 8,000 or 9,000 words. It'd be nice if I could say otherwise, but it's not otherwise. That's how it is. Even if you read children's books have a very large vocabulary, because when young native speakers go to school, they go to school with a vocabulary size of about 4,000 or 5,000 words. A 5-year-old native speaker of English knows at least 3,000 or 4,000 words. And when they go to school, they do reading in the words they already know. So a large vocabulary size is necessary. Okay, so have a look at my website. Everything on my website is free. Okay, that upsets publishers, I know, but that's how it is. I'm also trying to, on the website, to build up a collection of graded readers at the 1,000 and 2,000 level. What I'm doing is I'm finding the graded readers which are no longer printed, which have gone out of print because they didn't sell enough copies. And the two examples I've put up there are graded readers that I wrote. So I wrote 2 graded readers with a friend, and they quickly went out of print. Shows how bad they were. So if you want some bad graded readers, go to my website and they're available free. I hope to be able to encourage other writers who have written bad graded readers to also put them there, so that at least you can get some bad ones for free, and then you'll go and buy the good ones from the publishers. Thank you for your patience and toleration.
Thank you, Mr. Nation. Thanks for reminding all of us the importance of planning a course by choosing the appropriate vocabulary to focus on with extensive reading and balancing effective activities. I guess some of the teachers, not here, think that when it comes to vocabulary teaching, cramming is the best solution. We know it is not. We great teachers all know we have to help students to internalize the input which is acquired from lots of reading and listening, and elicit the output through meaningful and practical activities. You know, actions speak louder than words. And Mr. Nation, thanks for your tip. Great tip for student discipline or students' participation. Don't put up your hands if you want to give your answer. Thanks.
Let's check the questions on the Twitter, if you have any. Or is there anyone who has questions in the audience? Please raise your hand if you have any questions to Mr. Nation.
Thank you so much for your fabulous lecture, and I feel so lucky that you don't have a quite peculiar New Zealand accent, so it's easy for me to understand your lecture. I want to know, how do you stimulate your students' extensive reading? After their extensive reading, we needed to find a good way to stimulate or boost their reading, like book log or any kind of book report or reading journal. Which do you prefer? I want to know.
Mr. Nation, would you please answer the question? Come again, please. Would you please briefly summarize your question one more time?
You can answer too.
I want to know your good way to stimulate your students' extensive reading, like book report or reading log or kind of a reading journal. Which one do you prefer?
So how do you stimulate extensive reading? Punishment. I'm partly serious about that, and the reason I'm partly serious is that one of my students, she was a doctoral student, but she wasn't my doctoral student. But in her doctoral research, she looked at getting students to do extensive reading. And so she set it as homework, and not many people did it. And this went on for a couple of years, in fact. And then what she did was said, well, this is wasting time. So she actually then made them do it in class. So you're in class, we're going to have 10 or 15 minutes once a week on extensive reading, and if you don't do it, I'm going to do whatever teachers do to students to make them do things. So she forced the students to do extensive reading. And so she did this for about 2 months, and then set it as homework. And the amount done as homework was much, much greater than was in the previous years. And I think the reasons were, first of all, when the learners did it, they found this is something that I can do. And they learned how to do extensive reading. And the second thing they learned, many of them learned, was it's actually fun. When you can read and understand and the stories are interesting, then it's something that you can get enjoyment from. And one of the interesting findings in research on extensive reading is there doesn't seem to be much connection between extensive reading in the learner's first language and extensive reading in the second language. Learners can be very good extensive readers in the second language and not do much reading in their first language. And the same happens the other way. Learners can be quite good first language readers, but don't get very excited about reading in the second language. So there doesn't seem to be a close connection there. So when I say punishment, I think that's important because there are many things that we know from research and from common sense which are good for learning. But learners are often not willing to do them unless there is some pressure. So I think that teachers have to be quite hard on some of these things and say, when you're in my class, this is what you do. And so we're going to do extensive reading and you're going to do extensive reading. And I'm going to make sure you do. And then, once the learners can do it, then you then try to get them to be more autonomous as a result of doing it. But if you set it up without that preparation, then I think it's very difficult. Because there are many other more interesting things to do, like play with your cell phone and do all of those sorts of things. So I think that would be the first part of your answer. The second part of the answer is, if extensive reading is being done, it's important not to take time away from it. And so that means that any reporting or keeping a log must be very brief. Name of the book, did you enjoy it? You know, would you let your brother read it or not? Or something like that. And just very quick answers. So instead of spending 10 or 15 minutes filling out a big chart or table or writing a summary, they could read another 20 or 30 pages. So it's important that when you do extensive reading, it remains as extensive reading and not as some other activity which is being built on it. Sustained silent reading, yeah, there's many names, was it? Dear, drop everything and read. I drop everything anyway, but I don't always read when I drop everything. And there's, yeah, I think there's about 5 or 6 different names for it, but they're really all the same thing. Just do lots of quiet reading where your focus is on understanding what you're reading. You imagine if you've never read a book in English from the beginning to the end before, and you do that and you actually understood what you read. Just imagine that feeling. I remember when I was studying Indonesian, I learned the Indonesian language. I can remember that when I reached the end of the first book that I read from beginning to end in Indonesian, I was so proud of myself. And so that you want learners to have that feeling. And so extensive reading has to be successful, so it's got to be at the right level for the learners. But quantity is very important. And the way we look at quantity is you need to be reading about one book every 2 weeks, otherwise the words don't come back quick enough in order to strengthen the previous meetings with the word. That is, if you only read a few books, when the words come back again, they've forgotten the first meeting. So that's why about every couple of weeks you need to be reading onto another book. If you want to look at the research on that, go to my website. 1999, I published an article in the journal Reading in a Foreign Language, trying to work out how much quantity of extensive reading should be.
Contrary to the punishment case, here we give class and you need the rewards. What kind of rewards do you use? Rewards.
Rewards? Well, I've been advocating punishment, but I guess true autonomy comes through loving what you're doing. Many people go through life and never love what they're doing. I'm one of the luckiest people in the world because what I do, I love doing. And that's what you want to do with extensive reading. You want extensive reading quickly to become its own reward.
Thank you very much for the answer, Mr. Ocean. Okay, the first half of today's session is now complete. Thank you very much for your attention to the ceremony and the plenary session. Before you have a break, let us make some announcements.
First, please don't leave till the last day of the workshop since a lot of terrific lottery luck items are waiting for you. On the last day of this workshop, we are going to give out lottery tickets at the entrance. I think I should tell you that we have more than what you can imagine. One of them is on iPad. Isn't it quite tempting? Lots of prizes have your name on them waiting just for you.
Also, if you have any questions or comments about the venues and programs, you can talk to any of our staff members wearing blue shirts today. They are more than happy to be of your assistance.
Please refer to the book for the schedule of the workshop. Enjoy your break time, and it will be greatly appreciated if you are back to your seats at 3:50 sharp. Thank you very much.